So welcome back to Mckinley. Today I'd like to share with you my thinking behind the coaches that we're putting together. We call them coach sets for the time machine. As you might recall, the time machine starts in 1956 and ends in 1975. And one of the things I had to do was to try and ascertain what was the mix of coaching stock in British Railways during that time. There were a series of great little booklets produced by British Railways every year called Facts and Figures, or the Yearbook. And there's one here from 1962 which shows the pride of the railways at the time, the Deltic fleet coming in. And I'm going to refer to the 1967 book, which shows Freightliner just coming out. And the interesting thing is, in 1956 there were over 42,000 coaches on British Railways. And by 1967 it had gone down to just 22,000. So in 10 years they scrapped 20,000 coaches. British Railways built about 13,000 Mark I coaches. So you can see that in 1956 it was predominantly company stock, that's pre-nationalisation stock from Great Western, London Midland and Scottish, London North Eastern and Southern. It was predominantly made up of company coaching stock, but by 1967 it was predominantly made up by British Railways stock. When I started Mckinley Railway, the first version of it, in the early 2000s, there was only one model railway coach manufacturer that had produced a coaching set that worked well in model railway terms. There were lots of coaching sets, but they were the Bachmann Mark Is. And the reason I loved them was because they had kinematic couplings, and they also had this fantastic little hosepipe connector which allowed you to hold the coaches very closely together. And as though they're the only ones that had this functionality built in by the manufacturer, I bought about 100 of them for Mckinley in 2002. And so my railway is predominantly made up with just Bachmann Mark I coaches, which of course doesn't suit the time machine, which is predominantly company stock in the first 10 years. In the last 15 years, Bachmann and Hornby have upped their games considerably, and they produced whole sets of coaches from all the companies in fantastic quality as well. So we have the Hornby Hawksworths and the Gresleys, the non-corridor stock, the LMS portholes from Bachmann and the Thompsons. That mix of good coaching stock from the model manufacturers, the ready-to-run market, has allowed me to then be able to fulfill the thinking behind the time machine, in the sense that we can build the rakes of coaches that are appropriate. Then enter Ian into the equation with me in terms of trying to work out what different kinds of coaches we would need for each of the rakes, and not forgetting that there were at least 4 or 5 different livery changes by British Railways. There was Crimson and Cream, Blood and Custard was the same thing. We had Chocolate and Cream, we have Southern Region Green, which stayed for the whole duration. We had Corporate Maroon, that was what they forced on the railways, the regions in the 1960s, and then it went to Blue Grey. When you put all those things together, you suddenly realise that you need quite a lot of coaches, the formations, what is going to make a realistic set of trains to run through that period. And at the end of it, we came up with a set of coaches and DMUs that fitted and allowed us to portray the scene in every year from 56 to 75. That required 60 rakes of loco haul coaches, from small 4-car local suburban sets up to 8-car express trains, which is our maximum length on Mckinley. And it required about 40 DMUs. And in the DMU category, I'm including the Blue Pullman and the HST, just for completeness. So that's 100 rakes of loco hauled and self-propelling coaching stock. And that's one of the drivers behind the size and scale of Hades. About half of Hades is taken up by coaching stock of one form or another. In total, we estimated we needed to support about 180 trains in Hades so that we could run the goods scene and the passenger scene in 1956 and realistically portray it going through each and every year until we get to 1975. Going back to 2000, I started off with the first version of Mckinley and had purchased those 100 Bachmann coaches and thought at the time it'd be great to have them lit. And I went to a UK manufacturer, a little electronics manufacturer, and we devised a specification of DCC controllable coach lighting sets, basically set on a switch address. And they were little strips that you could basically put one in each coach. You could join them all up so they would stay alive, and you could turn them all on in a coach set with, say, switch number 50 on and switch number 50 off, and they would all go on and off accordingly. So those 100 were all lit. So fast forward to 2017, 2018, there's Ian and me with 400 coaches, and in my wisdom, I said, well, we've got to have that carrying on, haven't we? We need all of the coaches being lit. And if we're going to have them lit and we can see inside them, we need to add people. But the interiors are so dull, why don't we find out what we can do? So I then went on a search and I talked to a guys at Kites Lights and said, I'd like to order 3,000 little people, please. He duly obliged, but he did have to check with me twice that I knew how many noughts were on 3,000. He was a bit surprised by my demands. And then I found that many, many years ago, Pico had produced some interior moquette coach seating. You know, that lovely moquette thing on Mark 1 coaches? They did that for the Kitmaster range of coaches. So I bought some from Australia. They were about £7 on eBay and 50 quid for shipping. But there we go. That's the nature of life on eBay, isn't it? So the trouble is, I've upped the ante. I've gone and talked to a new manufacturer now about producing a coach lighting system, which I'll explain in a minute. I've decided to add people, and I'm going to do interiors, coach interiors, and paint all these things up so they look really nice and dandy. I've just set the mountain height worse than Everest, and I can tell you that in the year we've been working on this, we still haven't even got to base camp. There's one other point I forgot to add to the problems getting to base camp, and that was to do with the coach connectors and the NEMs, which is a pocket that's supposed to be a standard, and it isn't, but I'll cover that another day. So on the first of these components, the coach lighting, I went back to the original manufacturer, and he wasn't interested in trying to either resurrect his coach lighting kit or develop something new. And in addition, Ian and I had worked out that we had a real complication on our hands, because when I started off in 2000 with the coach lighting, they were all the same length. There were 100 Bachmann Mark 1 coaches. Now, I've got all kinds of various coaches, going from Mark 3s, which are way longer than anything else. You've got the standard BR class, then they get shorter and shorter and shorter, all the way down to those 50-foot brake guards that the LMS had. And then if you want to light the DMU motor units that Bachmann produced because you're not happy with the lighting kit that's in them, then you need an even shorter version. So we produced a booklet. We went through and we checked every single coach that we could find and checked the lengths. We put a coach on the side. We measured where all the carriage compartments were, where the toilets were, where the end corridors were, and whether it was an open or a corridor coach. And we carried on going through every coach. As you can see, there are hundreds of them. There's the Hawksworths. Here, there's the Gresleys. And they're all different lengths. We approached Fraser from Signatrack and said, can you help? We've got all these different things. We've got all these coaches of variant lengths. We've done all these templatings. Could you prototype something for us? And bless him, he went away and devised a coach lighting system which was, well, in one sense quite straightforward, but also revolutionary in its approach. And I've got 3 of the boards that we're using from him here. And if you notice, they're different lengths, but actually the boards are all the same boards. And what Fraser designed for us was a coach lighting system that allowed us to slide the LEDs up and down these rails. And we could either put a resistor on or an LED at that location, determining whether there needed to be light or not. At this end here, there is the DCC control that allows us to switch this set on and off. We have tried with 2 different sets of LED lights to imitate the old tungsten lighting as well as the more modern LED lighting found in the later coaches. And these ones here we have templated, as you can see, That's for the Mark II trailer second open. That there is for the Gresley restaurant buffet with the additional corridor lighting component just there. This one here is for a Mark I TPO. And then this one here, of all things, is for the LMS Period 3 brake guard. And we simply break these things off at these points depending on the length we required, and these are our master sheets. These are the master ones we use to make up all our different coach sets. Moving forward to showing you how one of those coach lighting units fits into a coach. Here we have a coach where we have put the people in, we've decorated the seats. The carpet fitters haven't turned up yet, but I'm sure they will. We've even got a waiter serving the people at their tables, but there are no plates on the tables. But here you can see is the lighting unit with each of the LEDs in the appropriate areas, and then additional LEDs at the ends for the corridors, and 2 LEDs for the 2 toilet areas which are on this side here. We have 2 connectors which we run through the coach ends to join up the coaches so that we have continuity of power when the train is moving. And that we have to replicate 400 times. The people that we order from Kites Lights, 3,000 of them, come in this beautiful array of colours, shapes and sizes. They were all pre-painted, and the nice chap there wasn't quite sure what the heck we were doing. 3,000 people, that's quite a lot, he said. All seated, are you sure? Yes. What is it, a football stadium? No, it's 400 coaches. So we populate them, and Tony has a bit of fun creating different scenes in every coach. He has little cameos, and I've asked him to record those things so that we can capture, oh, that's Mr. Johnson from Coventry having a bit of a strop with the ticket inspector, just so that we have little funny moments for every train that goes on Mckinley. One final component I'd just like to quickly cover in this overview is to do with the pickups that we've installed on these coaches. The ones we've started off with were these little stick-on pads that have 2 phosphor bronze pickups that rub against each wheel. Ideally good for picking up power, but they created a lot of drag on the train, especially when you had 8 coaches with pairs of pickups on one bogie. The other problem that we've experienced with these is that when we tried to soften the pressure of the phosphor bronze pickup against the wheel, we created stresses that forced these bogies to start crabbing, which means that they were just looking for any weakness on the track circuitry to derail themselves. The one thing we know about Mckinley, the existing layout, is it's been running for 15 years, and we've been running coach sets of 8 cars for that time, and they stay on reliably day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. But with these new sets of coaches, we've done this work here, it's proving to be a real pain. Unbelievable amount of hours to try and get them to run to the levels of reliability we need on Mckinley. So we're having to have a bit of a rethink about how we do electrical pickups into the coaches. So once we've got all the people in, we've got all the interior carpets have been laid properly, the coach lighting system's been put in, the connectors are there, what does it look like? And so the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We've programmed this particular coach to be on switch number 6. It's off at the moment. I turn it on, and then I turn it off again, and I turn it on. That's good, something's working. Here is our work schedule list for all the coach sets and the parcel sets for Mckinley Railway. The parcel sets are on the left, the coach sets are on the right. If we look at the coach sets for a second, you can see that we have got all different kinds of ticks and things to go through and checks to do to make sure that each coach set has passed that particular point or test that needs to be done. Once it's all been done through, we strike through that line. What we found though is that it still doesn't seem to be enough of a testing program to make sure they're running well, and we're having to revisit that process. But at least you get a picture of the scale of what we're trying to do here. So here's some examples of some of the coaches that are in the acceptance process right now, running on the existing Mckinley layout. As you can see, there are still some bugs with the system. Some of the coach lights are still off when they should be on. Some of the lighting is too bright in the coaches, but that's a quality control issue with us, not with the board lighting system. We actually can change the lighting, it's just somebody didn't change the lighting in those coaches, down to the appropriate level. This system isn't commercially available yet from Signatrack. We are in the process of testing it, and in time I'm sure it will become available. So here you can see some of these coaches going through Birmingham in both directions, and they look quite beautiful. But it's become a bit of a mission, and the one thing I'm very conscious of is that we need to get on with building the extension. We've taken the decision to stop building any of the coach sets beyond 1963 so that we can get back to building the layout and take stock of what we're doing with these coach sets, take a breather, and then be able to start again once we've possibly finished the extension layout and we've connected it up with the existing Mckinley. Basecamp isn't that far away, and I'm quite certain we're going to get there. I have a very committed and clever team around me to do it, but boy, some days you do wonder. But we will be there, and thank you for listening.